I think this sort of developer is very hard to beat. Like you will get any and every sort of job.
Give us some example of, let's say, 3 or 4 good projects which you see a beginner or someone who is just starting out should definitely do this kind of projects.
I still can't solve lead code problems you give me, but I don't think that I'm a bad backend developer.
Hi Mehul.
Hi Anshika.
कैसे हो आप?
All good. How are you?
मैं भी बहुत सही हूँ एंड काफ़ी आज एक्साइटेड भी हूँ क्योंकि आज हम बहुत ही डिटेल में बैकएंड डेवलपमेंट के बारे में बात करने वाले हैं. सो स्टार्ट करें उस चीज़ को.
बिल्कुल.
ठीक है, चलो शुरू करते हैं. सो मेहुल, माय फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन टू यू वुड बी, व्हाट डज अ बैकएंड डेवलपर डू? अगर किसी को पता ही नहीं है कि इसमें होता क्या है तो वो थोड़ा सा एक्सप्लेन करोगे?
Sure. So, backend development, think about it as a person who handles everything which your server does. So, in order to understand ki what a server do, try to take any example like Twitter, for example, या Facebook, या कोई भी website, which is like social media, e-commerce, anything. In case of e-commerce, let's say if you click on add to cart and then let's say you move to your mobile phone, आपका कार्ट सेम रहता है, राइट? वाई? बिकॉज योर डेटा इज स्टोर्ड ऑन बैक एंड. दोज बैक एंड रिजॉल्वर्स सेंड द सेम डेटा विच इज सेंड टू योर डेस्कटॉप to the mobile phones also. So it's about like programming a system which is owned by the company. Just say if you are working in your own startup, yeah, if you're working anywhere, so you own kuch servers, right? You own certain compute power. So there are some servers you own and there are some devices which your customers own, just a mobile phone, desktop, everything. The systems you own, उनको प्रोग्राम करने का when you program them, उनको कहते हैं backend programming. And when you program client-side computers like mobile phones and desktops, Mac OS, उन पे क्या दिख रहा है? That is called as front-end programming.
So when we talk about backend, it becomes very vast. Like I'll give you an example. For today, let's say if I say someone कि यार front-end आप सीख लो, तो what they will do is कि पहले HTML सीखेंगे, CSS सीखेंगे, JavaScript सीखेंगे, and on top of that कोई framework सीख लेंगे. For that, let's say React, Vue, Angular, कुछ भी सीख लिया. What could be an ideal roadmap for backend development? कहाँ से शुरू करें and क्या-क्या चीज़ें सीखें, जैसे कि मैंने आपको front end के लिए बताया.
So the first thing before even getting to roadmap is I feel give yourself a reason. Now that reason could be a goal also in a way कि you want to change job let's say in 3 months. Yeah, you want to upskill yourself for a project you want to always build. कोई startup app idea, कुछ something in the span of 4-5 months. So set a goal for yourself, give yourself some thing to look forward to कि I want to learn backend because I want to do this, that जो भी reason है तुम्हारा. Once you have done that, then it becomes at least a question of कि अब करना क्या है instead of कि करना क्यों है, क्योंकि करना क्यों is a dangerous question. इसका आंसर most of the times no होता है if you are living in a comfortable life. अब करना क्या है? For backend, I feel this is also something which we have Codedam के backend learning path में कि you start with not a programming language initially, you start with the fundamentals of how internet actually works. कि अभी जैसे मैंने एग्जांपल दिया e-commerce का, add to cart, click on that, तो backend पे कुछ information गई. Now how do you actually know कि वो information गई भी है या नहीं? तो in case of web browsers, which is like a very popular way to browse internet, web browsers में if you're using Chrome या फिर any modern browser, you can see the communication जो front end और back end का हो रहा है. A lot of people know this because a lot of tutorials exist online कि how to modify your follower count and this that through inspect element, but that is like a very powerful tool to inspect what is going on. So the first thing, the first course or the first learning which I would say is try to inspect how the internet works. When you go to Facebook या when you go to any chat app, तो क्या क्या connections establish हो रहे हैं? What all does that mean? What are HTTP codes, status code, return values, headers, this that? तो ये ना this might seem like a lot of things, but this is like a very simple way of communication. Once you have an overview, I think the next step obviously is to learn a programming language because this language will then allow you to for the very basic part, code up an HTTP server, code up something. Now, when you create an HTTP server, you can, what you're basically doing is कि you write some code backend पे, run it, and within your system, you start seeing the output in the browser. Just say you wrote hello world in Node.js, let's take an example. You see it in the browser. Now you can build on top of this. You will have to learn about APIs. एक बार तुमने server बना लिया, now you have to create a standard set of communication. कि how do I register, let's say, a user, or how do I allow a user to log in my service. So when you learn about these APIs and things, programming language के साथ, eventually you would need a database जहाँ पर you can persist information. You can persist information in a running program also, but that is dangerous because once you shut or restart the program, so it gets lost. So that is why you need a database, right? A database is, think of it as a store, or think of it as a permanent storage somewhere on your disk या फिर on your cloud. So once you have a programming language and a database knowledge, database could be anything, SQL, NoSQL, MySQL, MongoDB, जो भी, whatever you want to pick up, कुछ भी उठा लो. Because initially the concepts remain same in a database also. Indexes and tables becomes collections, rows becomes records, and so on. One-on-one analogy hai in NoSQL versus SQL. So what you want is those concepts first, not just don't get into a fight of ki NoSQL is better, SQL is better. Both are better for you at the scale which you will start as a backend developer. So learn about them, learn about fundamentals, and pick up that programming language of yours. Again, I'm not getting into specifics. I have my own biases. Like I'm a JavaScript, Node.js developer, so I will recommend you that. But wo bas ek solution nahi hai. There are a lot of solutions outside there. Rust is one. You can even write C++ servers. That also exists. Very high performance cheezein, but that is not recommended because it's very low level. Python, most popular out there. So options exist. Get a programming language, get a database, learn how they can communicate with each other. And itna bhi, if you just know these two technologies, you can build a lot of complex apps, because if you think about it, most of the apps online are CRUD based only. When I say CRUD, it means create, read, update, and delete operations. And CRUD applies on databases. So when you create, let's say, tum Twitter pe gaye ya Facebook pe gaye, you created an account, you created something in their database, right? Then you update your profile photo. So what you are doing is you are updating that record in the database. Everything exists in the database, right? That is a single storage. You learn about create, read, update, delete operations. Delete ho gaya, just if you unfriended someone, so that link got deleted. All of this technically is happening somewhere in the database layer itself. जो programming language है, that is just a smart way to interact with database, because आप सबको अपना record या फिर पूरा system का access नहीं दे सकते. Why? Because you need validation in place. You need to make sure कि लोग they are not doing wrong actions with their data which is exposed. So what you have is a programming language as a layer of validation and whatever you want to do in between. And database is your true like company asset, your company value. So once you have learned programming language and database, I think that is again, definitions to vary from person to person. कोई कहेगा I want a backend developer but expect something else. कोई कुछ कहेगा. But in my opinion, I feel कि if you just know these two things really well, एक programming language, एक database, and how to work alongside them, you are like a backend developer in a way, because you can program backends. I can throw you at a backend repo and you will be able to figure out कि क्या चल रहा है, because that is all it will have. Some tooling होगी, कुछ tooling outside ESLint, Prettier, ये वो जो भी है, that will be there. But rest of the things would remain the same. The programming language concepts and the database you're interacting with. On top of this, obviously, there are things you should consider now. Most importantly, like web security, first of all. Just say APIs you are creating, are they actually secure? Are you sanitizing the user data? Are you making sure that you're not accepting kuch bhi? Just say if user is expected to send, let's say you're building a bank app, right? Or they are expected to send a value ki account transfer from this account $10 to that account. So that 10 has to be a positive number, right? ये validations. Yeah. It is responsibility of your backend. कि अगर उन्होंने -10 भेज दिया तो क्या पता your software reverts back the transaction कि दूसरे बंदे ने भेज दिया. Because that is how like the maths work, right? 10 means send one direction to second direction, but negative could mean the opposite. So if you don't have these validations in place, you're not a good backend developer. So saying yourself a backend developer versus being a good one, ये दो अलग चीज़ें हैं, राइट? तो अभी हमने प्रोग्रामिंग एंड डेटाबेस में जो बात करी, दैट इज़ लाइक यू आर अ बैकएंड डेवलपर, बट हाउ टू नाउ बिकम अ गुड वन. तो उसके लिए वेब सिक्योरिटी आई फील इज़ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. लाइक यू शुड बी, आई थिंक आई ऑल्सो हैव अ वीडियो ऑन दिस ऑन यूट्यूब, बट यू शुड बी अ वेरी पैरानॉइड डेवलपर एज अ बैकएंड कि जो मैंने कोड लिखा है, हाउ कैन दिस बी हैक्ड? नॉट पैरानॉइड इन अ वे, बट जस्ट क्यूरियस कि try to write code, but also try to now break into your own software, because when you deploy it on your startup, your company, wherever, there would be people at scale. If you get popular, the first thing you will have is getting hacked. Okay? Someone will abuse your abuse your services. Someone will DDoS your services. They would send so much traffic. So you have to be prepared in a way. There are things you can do at code level. There are things that needs to happen at service level, जैसे AWS या Cloudflare. You have to bring in the big players to prevent DDoS attacks. But code level पे web security is one. Code level पे making sure that you're using the correct tool chain. जैसे if you're using Node.js, तो बहुत ज़्यादा सेंस बनता है कि use TypeScript for type safety, right? So that you catch smaller, bigger bugs while refactoring and doing all sorts of things. It makes sense to use strict ESLint things. Like, you don't want very casual style of writing, because if you, let's say, have 5 more developers, all of them would have a style of writing code. That is how it works. Log develop their style of work. So you would have to have these tool chains in place. Then once you have that in place, you also have to build a very proper development pipeline, because what you don't want ideally is कि backend master builds, whatever master या फिर whatever production builds you have, they get crashed. So what you have to do is build a proper CI pipeline. Now technically, I mean, some people think that this is not a backend role, but as a backend developer, I think you should know end to end from the moment you're writing code to the moment it is deployed, and how it communicates with database, and what is the performance implementation, and how it varies from deployment to deployment. ये सारी चीज़ें भी I think you should know as a backend developer. So for CI/CD, for example, continuous integration and deployment, you should have a system जहाँ पर you just push a commit. Let's say if you're using Git, which is the most popular, you push a commit to a Git repo. It runs your code, it downloads it, it runs tests against your code, it builds it, it checks कि सब कुछ सही है या नहीं, core features are not broken. Because you can refactor as much as you want, but as long as you have tests which ensure that the core functionality is working, you should be good. So all of this is very hard to do manually. Like एक scale के बाद you can do it, just अपने projects में manually कि made some change, went to the page, tried registering the user, and still working. So you'll deploy it. But imagine if you're working in a company जहाँ पर thousands of pages हैं, tens of thousands of APIs हैं. So you need some way to automate this testing. So that is where the CI/CD deployment pipelines come in place. GitHub Actions is one of the CI/CD providers. So using that alongside unit test या integration test makes you a good backend developer. Like I said, कि ये सारी चीज़ें, if you have testing knowledge as well, they will help you ship very high quality code. Then that's it. I mean, इसके बाद what happens is, which is an important part, is deployments वाली चीज़. How does your backend deploy? Now imagine you have written the best code in the world, but you are running it on EC2 instance, which is T2 micro, which can't handle like thousands of connections. So it's useless, right? So your site will go down and bad things will happen. So deployment, I think the best way, or the most efficient way these days, and it is very popular also these days, is talking about edge and serverless and how to deploy on these things. So being aware about कि these solutions exist also is an important cheese. कि you as a backend developer wrote a microservice and you say to your management, your team, कि इसको instead of EC2, why don't we deploy it on AWS Lambda, which is serverless, which helps me scale the code indefinitely. कितने भी लोग आ जाए, will not go down, and so on. Right. So scalable, if you are writing scalable code, that can be deployed in scalable environments like serverless, AWS. That is, I think, the final frontier as a backend developer. You started with the programming language, you covered database, you covered their connection, you covered the tool chain around it, you covered the deployment, CI/CD, tests, and then you finally also were able to determine what environment I have to deploy to make it very scalable. I think this sort of developer is very hard to beat. Like you will get any and every sort of job if you want, because people, startups, companies are always looking for these solutions which make their code more efficient, more increase their servers availability, makes it cheaper for them to host. And if you are that kind of developer, if you become that following this roadmap, I think you should be unbeatable.
Tell me one thing, one curiosity I have was, what about a fresher just graduating out of college and want to become a backend developer? Like, does he or she have to go through all of this to land a decent job as a backend developer?
So like I said, no, requirement for backend developer वही है कि programming language and database. If you know that, you will land some basic role in some startup for sure. Like because you startup founders, people also need someone कि कोई इसको offload कर ले, कि someone who I can tell कि let's make this API, that API. It's a journey, right? You can't just become a great developer and that's it.
Makes sense, makes sense. Just out of curiosity, I'm asking here, when we are saying programming language, we can mention here any programming language. If you want, you can start Java, Python, JS, whatever is it, right?
Yeah, I mean, इसके case में what I would say is कि you also have to be careful अगर if you have a preference of working. जैसे startups में Node.js is very popular. You would not find PHP that popular right now. So the way you have to think is कि यहाँ पर भी you have to do a little bit of research. Let's say you want to work in a job in a startup. I think Node.js is a good choice because a lot of people, a lot of companies use Node.js or Python, these sort of languages. If you think कि you want to do freelancing, then freelancing में क्या होता है, a lot of people maintain websites or maintain legacy code. तो वहाँ पर PHP I think is still very popular, especially WordPress में. जैसे WordPress is full PHP. You will get a lot of gigs, lot of offers for working on WordPress, setting up this, that. So if you want to do freelancing, then PHP might be good one. If you want to go for bigger companies, जो enterprises होते हैं, they prefer developers who have Java experience because Java is a very popular choice in enterprises. कि कुछ भी सीख लिया and then you are figuring out the companies. Do it in reverse. Like figure out the companies you want to work with, ideally 5, 6, 10 companies जो भी हैं, and then try to see what tech stack they use actively and then learn this. And this is like strictly for people who are like new. If you are already learning something, that's okay. That's, you can just keep learning it, because the thing is if you also learned a thing, like if you know PHP or Node.js, transitioning to another language is relatively easier. The first language is the hardest to learn.
When we say programming languages, do we mean just the basic stuff like for loop, while loop, if clauses, or for that sake, these sort of things? Or we also include that you learn this programming language and along with that also spend time learning data structures and algorithm?
Programming languages, when I say simplest, the best programs are actually simple. Like if you think about programming languages and if you think about code, you think कि बहुत complex कुछ हो रहा है, कुछ something difficult is happening. But if you look at code bases which are high quality, they are well documented, they are simple to understand, and they're like, they don't use magic a lot. जैसे generator functions वगैरह, तुम्हें ऐसा कुछ मिलेगा नहीं. If you have learned JavaScript, you know कि these async function generators, iterables exist. Mostly these are abstractions which are used by underlying libraries, not by you. Similarly with data structures and algorithms, these are abstractions which are already available out there. I mean, जैसे languages themselves come with a lot of things, objects, sorting functions, this, that. So all of this exists. Like I've never in my life implemented a merge sort algorithm myself, because that is useless to do, to be honest, in a backend web development where you have a business objective, you have to build this pipeline, you have to build this feature. Why would you implement something which exists already out there? Yes, for learning purposes, yes, but for actual work, likely not. I feel like it's not absolutely required in terms of कि you should be a master in DSA or programming in this algorithmic programming in general. This is not very useful. If this helps you think better as a developer, then sure, but this is not like a criteria. I mean, I still can't solve lead code problems you give me, but I don't think that I'm a bad backend developer. So that notion I think needs to be removed, and it will be removed eventually when people see कि jobs में and startups are actually not just asking questions at all for DSA, and finding shortest path 2 points ke beech mein, it doesn't make sense. Like, why would you want to do that when these algorithms already are there for you to read and learn when they are required? So that is my view. I have not seen any use case as such. You can, if you're a good developer, you can learn on the job if required, but don't spend like 3, 4, 5, 6 months if your goal is to just get a job in a startup. They will not care.
In terms of timeline itself, let's say that a person just wants to learn any programming language and learn database and basic of internets on top of that, so that he can just land a decent job in, let's say, some startup or whatever company he wants to. So what do you think is an ideal time which is more than enough to learn these 3, 4 things and become I'm just saying a beginner backend developer, so that he can get a good job? That's it.
I think there is no one answer to this, but I'll try to discover an answer with you. So I feel that this depends on 3 factors. The first one is the amount of time you put on a daily basis, average amount of time you put on a daily basis. The second factor is that what resource you are using to consume this. Like, if you're using videos, or if you're actually doing practice, if you're reading it from books. And the third thing I believe is what is your expectation also of a job? Like, if you want, you can get easily a job which is low paying based on your skill. But if you want a very high paying job with, benefits and this, that, then you'll also have to bring that level of value to the table. Now, speaking about time, the reason I think this is important is because what you have to do in order to become a great developer, let alone backend developer, is be in touch with code pretty much all the time, right? On a daily basis. That means that 7 hours of learning on a Sunday does not mean 1 hour of learning every day. 1 hour of learning every day is better than 7 hours of learning on a single day. Because when you are in touch with code all the time, you will build your knowledge on top of that. You can't be, just introducing long breaks in your coding journey. You have to, if you can, you have to spend at least 2.5, 3 hours initially to learn about things, because you will learn a lot of wrong things. You will make a lot of mistakes. So you need that buffer time. Actual learning time might not be more than a couple of months or 3 months maximum. But what you will need is a lot of time to make mistakes, a lot of time to gather that experience. And that is where the time is spent. People, when they figure out, right, people say, ki, maine is bug pe, I spent so many hours. And semicolon missing tha, which is usually a joke, but semicolon ki jagah sometimes it happens, like you have a misspelled variable name, ya fir you have something function ke aage async missing tha, jo bhi hai. When you do mistakes like these, it feels like waste of time, but you will realize ki ye cheez na kabhi dobara nahi hogi. So that is what I feel is very important as a beginner in your timeline. You can set a timeline of 6 months where you learn 1 hour on a consecutive day, or you can set a timeline of 3 months also where you spend 3 hours every day. It has diminishing returns. ऐसा नहीं है कि you just spend 24 hours so you will become, in a week you will become a master. ऐसा नहीं है. You have to give breaks also. But I think most people underperform anyway. So it's better अगर if you just learn as much as you can, spend as much time as you can on a daily basis. Do it on a daily basis. Trust me. Like no, not on weekends. Not on I have a job, I have a school. नहीं, I kept learning coding when I was in 11th, 12th also with JEE preparation. So I know it is possible. It's all the excuses people give. They are just excuses. You can make out time for things you want. It's just that you have to work.
Makes sense. I think a very good point put by you when you talked about these factors coming in about the timeline itself. I would like to understand from you, like how we discussed right now. We discussed that it's very important to build skills and also having practical knowledge of whatever you are learning. So whenever we say practical knowledge, it brings us to that you have to make some good projects. Like let's say if I'm learning how to build an API, how to connect it with my databases, what all queries to write. So I'm definitely going to build some of the projects to learn it. So can you give us some example of, let's say, 3 or 4 good projects which you see a beginner or someone who is just starting out should definitely do this kind of projects?
Sure. I mean, in case of speaking for backend, I think like we mentioned earlier, most backend things are based on CRUD. So I think you
Yeah.
can think of examples of projects which are built on top of CRUD applications. Social media, for example, is one that you build a small social media clone. Now, this could be like a Twitter like service or could be anything which is built on these operations. You have user registrations, user login, timelines, following your friends and so on. So this is like one way to think about this is what features you want to build in or what you want to showcase the other user, then build on top of that. So CRUD is a set of one thing. Another set of things could be like real-time communication. So if you're going into RTC, then building a chat app, for example, is a good way to go forward. Building a real-time game. So you take up a game like I forgot the name, वो क्या उसको जीरो काटा को जो बोलते हैं game. You can build that as a multiplayer game where people can play that on their browsers. That will involve WebSockets. That will involve you to create WebSocket servers on backend. Then if you really want to impress your interviewer, you can tell them how you also deployed it on AWS using API gateway, HSAB, whatever you deployed. So I mean that's basically it backend के context में. How you can think of projects, I can give you tens of ideas, but that doesn't matter because what you have to pick is key what you want the end user to see, and end user means key the recruiter in this case. What you want the recruiter to see, if they want real-time apps, for example, in our case, जैसे Codedamp पे, if let's say if I'm hiring you, I would want to see how well do you understand key front end and back end components can interact in real time. So for me to impress, you can build a very scalable applications with WebSockets, and you can build a game where where multiple people can join together and they can move cursors. जैसे Figma work करता है कि you have operational transform. This is like थोड़ा सा advanced side पे, but you have like multiple people editing a Google Doc. So building a real-time editor itself is an insanely hard project. So that could be one thing to impress me as working for Codedamp, because we do these things. Similarly, if you're building a basic backend project, CRUD is the way to go. E-commerce, typical projects work. It's just that what you should not be doing is downloading a project, modifying it a bit, adding it to your resume, because anyone who takes your interview, if they ask you to walk through your code, they will know that you did not build this. So whatever you do it yourself. Basic things, do it. Follow the best practices, follow the best tooling, just we discussed abhi, and make sure you understand everything. Like it's okay to copy code from Stack Overflow, but also understand what you copied. Like don't just copy paste and let it be a black box, because when you have that, then you will screw up in your interviews. You don't know what that works. It's not as much about the projects as much as it is about building high quality 2, 3, 4 projects and having a very deep understanding of how they work.
I think, but you gave a really good example of real-time editors, like Google Docs.
Yeah.
It's a very good and complex sort of project if a beginner just wants to start out. And once you develop and build it, the kind of confidence and the kind of skill set you are going to have is like totally different.
That is true.
Yes, true. Then this was more around projects, learnings. Now, when we talk about any sort of development for that matter, two important things which comes into picture is GitHub, and also I think when we talk specifically about backend, Linux also come, or maybe for that sort any operating system which you use or kernels, that also comes into picture. So how can one learn about this, and what's the importance of exactly these two things into the development part?
I think that is important, and this is one thing which we didn't touch upon, so thanks for reminding me. I think Linux programming and understanding about systems in general is important, because as a backend developer you'll work a lot on CLI. So terminal you will have a screen by always open. So you should have like an understanding, and most people develop this eventually, but you should have a understanding of common Linux commands, how to navigate file system, how to run commands, and how to do this, that. 80% of stuff you will understand on the job, because most of the tutorials you follow वहाँ पर लिखा होगा write npm start, write npm run dev. 80% of that stuff you will learn on the job, but the 20% important चीज़ें, जैसे a little bit of bash programming in general. Bash is a notoriously verbose language according to me. I don't like programming in bash because its syntax बहुत अजीब है. But that is like important because bash is a very general programming language in a way कि servers पे भी available है. It's on Mac OS, it's on your systems. So it's important to learn those. Again, a course, interactive course, practice, hands-on practice. This will help you do some challenges on your own, learn about what all files exist on Linux systems, special files. Just I think a lot of people who already have a hacker mindset know this already. Just /etc/host file on Linux is used for ad blocking. You're disabling ads. So where you just paste some sort of host names and no ads will appear on your system, not in just browsers, but anywhere at all. So just the first thing you do if you jailbreak your Android phone is you install the ad blocker wali cheeze. So what they do is they modify that file because Android is also Linux in a way. So Linux is important as a backend developer because you will work on CLI for the most part. GitHub is also important. GitHub is a SaaS product. Git, I think, is a better way to put it.
Yeah.
Because you can't learn.
Exactly.
You can learn GitHub also. GitHub has some nice features, but Git is something which is important. But I'll tell you one thing. I think people over complicate Git in a way. People say that Git is hard because it is, but you don't need to touch the hard parts for the most time, like rebasing branches and just merge conflicting and resolving conflicts. This happens in teams of large sizes, but until and unless you are like just days behind and you are completely out of sync of your branches and this and that, only then these problems happen. For most part, as a beginner, it's more than enough if you understand why Git is important, concepts of branches, Git pull, fetch, how branches work, how to add commits, proper commit messages, how to push, how to review a pull request. That is like it will take you less than a couple of hours or a single course to understand, and should be more than enough for a lot of for your career.
Got it. Cool. I think I got too much information and very good context of what a backend developer does, how one can learn, what all different things can be done. I really enjoyed talking with you, Mehul.
Same here, Anushka.
Thank you so much for providing us so much valuable content. I hope we do some more sessions like this and like we keep on enriching our audience as well with content like this.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks Mehul. Thank you everyone. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe our channel and follow us for more content like this. Thank you. Bye-bye.